The ache was a familiar tenant in Alara's chest, a resident so long-standing it had stopped paying rent and simply taken up ownership of the space around her heart. It had been 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days since she had realized she was in love with her best friend. 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days of living as a ghost in her own life, a silent observer to Chloe's series of perfectly charming, utterly wrong boyfriends. Tonight, the ache was a particularly sharp and jagged thing, a shard of glass turning with every pain sigh that escaped Chloe's lips. "I just don't get it, Chloe murmured, her voice a frayed thread over the phone line. She was pacing the length of their shared living room, her socked feet whisper-soft on the hardwood floor. From her perch on the sofa, wrapped in a quilt that smelled faintly of their laundry detergent and her own quiet resignation, Alara watched the restless energy vibrating off of her friend. "He says all the right things. He brings me flowers. He remembers the name of my boss's dog. He checks all the boxes, you know." Alara knew. Oh, she knew all about Mark's meticulously curated perfection. She had been the one to coach Chloe through first date jitters, to celebrate their 1-month anniversary, to listen to the breathless recounting of their first "I love you." Each word had been another small, precise twist of the glass shard in her chest. "But a person isn't a checklist, Chloe." The words felt worn and thin, recycled from a dozen similar conversations about a dozen similar men. Alara was the curator of Chloe's romantic history, the keeper of her heartbreaks, the steadfast, supportive friend who was slowly being hollowed out from the inside. "I know," Chloe sighed, the sound heavy with a weariness that went bone deep. She sank onto the opposite end of the couch, tucking her legs beneath her. The lamplight caught the gold in her hair, turning it into a halo that felt both fitting and deeply unfair. She was beautiful even in her distress, a fact that did nothing to soothe Alara's fractured heart. But it should be enough, shouldn't it? It feels so greedy to have someone who is kind and attentive and handsome and still feel like you're starving. Starving. The word hung in the air between them, thick and resonant. Alara knew that feeling. It was the gnawing emptiness that greeted her every morning and tucked her into bed every night. It was the hunger for a touch that was more than friendly, a look that was more than fond. "Maybe you're just hungry for something different," Alara offered, her voice softer than she intended. Chloe's eyes, the color of warm whiskey, met hers. For a moment, there was a flicker of something new in their depths, something questioning and vulnerable that made Alara's breath catch. It was a look that saw past the supportive friend and into the empty spaces within Alara herself. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it was gone, shuttered away behind a veil of familiar frustration. "He wants me to move in with him," Chloe said, dropping the statement into the quiet room like a stone. The glass shard in Alara's chest didn't just twist. It shattered. The pain was sudden and blinding, a supernova of agony that stole the air from her lungs. This was it. The end of their cozy, shared life. The end of late-night talks and shared cartons of ice cream. The end of this fragile, painful, beautiful proximity that was the only thing keeping Alara from completely unraveling. She must have made a sound, a small, wounded gasp, because Chloe's expression softened with concern. "Elle? Are you okay?" "Fine," Alara lied, the word tasting like ash. She forced her lips into a smile that felt like a grimace. That's a big step. "Wow. Are you going to?" "I don't know," Chloe whispered, and the raw uncertainty in her voice was a tiny, flickering candle in the vast darkness of Alara's despair. "That's what we were fighting about. I told him I wasn't ready, and he doesn't understand why. He said, 'What are you waiting for?' and I didn't have an answer." She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders slumping. "What is wrong with me? He's offering me everything I'm supposed to want." "I'm what's wrong with you," Alara thought, the confession a silent scream in her mind. "I'm the reason you can't settle. I'm the thing you're measuring them all against, and you don't even know it." But she couldn't say that. To say it would be to detonate the bomb she'd been carefully disarming for 3 years. It would mean losing not just the hope of more, but the certainty of what they had. So she did what she always did. She uncurled from her quilt, crossed the small space between them, and sat down beside Chloe, wrapping a steadying arm around her friend's trembling shoulders. "There's nothing wrong with you," Alara said, her voice a low anchor in the storm of Chloe's confusion. "You're just not ready. And that's okay. He should respect that." Chloe leaned into the touch, her head coming to rest on Alara's shoulder. Her hair smelled of vanilla and something uniquely, indefinably Chloe. The contact was both a balm and a torture. It was the closest she could get, and a universe away from where she wanted to be. Her own body felt like a war zone, every nerve ending screaming for more while her mind screamed for retreat. "He just makes me feel," Chloe trailed off, searching for the word. "Like I'm playing a part. The good girlfriend. And I'm so tired of acting, I just want to feel real." Alara held her breath, the world narrowing to the weight of Chloe's head on her shoulder, the warmth of her body seeping through their clothes. "Me too," she thought, the words a prayer she would never speak aloud. God, me too. The stasis of her life, the careful balance of friendship and hidden longing, felt more precarious than ever. A fault line had appeared in the foundation of their world, and Alara had the terrifying premonition that the ground beneath her feet was about to give way completely. She had spent years learning to live with the quiet ache, but she was beginning to fear it was a terminal condition, one that would eventually consume her whole. The hours that followed were a blur of hushed tones and half-empty mugs of chamomile tea. Alara listened, soothed, and offered practiced platitudes while her own heart hammered a frantic, desperate rhythm against her ribs. Chloe's fight with Mark had evidently been a bad one, a culmination of months of simmering dissatisfaction. She spoke of feeling unseen, of her words being heard but not understood, of a fundamental disconnect that no amount of grand romantic gestures could bridge. Alara nodded in all the right places, her role as the supportive best friend so deeply ingrained it was muscle memory. But with every complaint Chloe voiced about Mark, a traitorous spark of hope ignited in the desolate landscape of Alara's heart. It was a cruel and selfish hope, and she hated herself for it. She should have been sad for her friend's pain, but instead, she felt a terrible, thrilling sense of vindication. "He doesn't see you," she thought. "He doesn't know the way your nose crinkles when you're trying not to laugh, or the specific shade of green your eyes turn in the rain. He doesn't know that you hum off-key when you cook, or that you're terrified of thunderstorms. I know. I see it all." Finally, close to 2 in the morning, the conversation wound down. Chloe's energy had dissipated, leaving behind a fragile, exhausted quiet. The lamp cast long shadows across the room, turning their familiar apartment into a space of secrets and unspoken things. "I should probably try to get some sleep," Chloe murmured, her voice thick with fatigue. She pushed herself up from the couch, her movements slow and heavy. "Do you want me to make up the guest bed?" Alara asked, her own body aching with a strange mixture of tension and weariness. Chloe stood in the middle of the living room, a solitary figure wrapped in the dim light. She looked small and lost. She chewed on her lower lip, a nervous habit Alara knew meant she was wrestling with something. "Actually," she began, then hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. The silence stretched thin and tight. Alara's heart, which had just begun to settle into a slower rhythm, kicked up again. What was it? What was she about to ask? When Chloe finally looked up, her eyes were wide and filled with a startling vulnerability. It was a look Alara had never seen on her confident, charismatic friend before. It made her want to gather Chloe into her arms and protect her from the world, from Mark, from everything that caused her pain. "This is going to sound weird," Chloe said, her voice barely a whisper. "And you can totally say no. It's just, I really don't want to be alone right now." Alara's throat went dry. "Okay," she managed to say, her own voice sounding foreign and distant. Chloe took a small, hesitant step towards the hallway that led to their bedrooms. Can I stay in here tonight? With you?" The question landed in the silent room and detonated. Time seemed to stop. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the distant rumble of a passing car, the sound of her own blood rushing in her ears, it all faded away. There was only Chloe's question, hanging in the space between them, impossibly large and terrifyingly fragile. This was new territory. This was a line they had never, in all their years of friendship, even approached. They'd had sleepovers, of course, but those were teenage affairs of sleeping bags and giggling. This was different. This was two adults, a shared bed, and a world of unspoken tension. Ilara's mind raced, a frantic catalog of reasons to say no. It was a bad idea. It would only make the ache worse. It would feed the hope she had just started to starve. It would be an exquisite form of torture, lying next to the one person she wanted in the world and knowing she couldn't have her. But her heart, that traitorous, hopeful organ, had a different answer. It screamed yes. Of course, Ilara heard herself say, the words emerging from some place of pure instinct, bypassing her panicked brain entirely. Yeah, of course, Chloe. A wave of relief washed over Chloe's face, so potent it was almost visible. Really? You're sure it's not weird? It's not weird, Ilara lied, her whole world tilting on its axis. Chloe gave her a small, grateful smile that made Ilara's stomach swoop. As she turned to head towards Ilara's bedroom, she paused and glanced back over her shoulder. She whispered, so quietly Ilara almost missed it, I don't usually do this. The confession was an intimate secret shared in the dead of night, and it sent a jolt of something hot and electric through Ilara's veins. It was an admission of need, of vulnerability, a crack in the perfect facade Chloe presented to the world. And she was showing it only to Ilara. A few minutes later, after they had both changed into sleep clothes in the privacy of their respective rooms, the moment arrived. Ilara was already in her bed, lying stiffly on one side, her body rigid with a nervous energy that felt like 1,000 hummingbirds trapped beneath her skin. She stared at the sliver of light coming from under her door, holding her breath. The door creaked open. Chloe slipped into the room, a silhouette against the dim hallway light. She moved with a quiet uncertainty, as if she were an intruder in this space she had been in 1,000 times before. She closed the door, plunging the room into near total darkness, save for the faint glow of the city lights filtering through the blinds. Ilara heard the soft rustle of the duvet as Chloe slid into the other side of the bed. The mattress dipped with her weight, a physical manifestation of this new, terrifying reality. The space between them felt both enormous and infinitesimal. It was a chasm of unspoken feelings and a sliver of cotton sheet. For a long time, neither of them moved or spoke. The only sound was their breathing, two distinct rhythms in the quiet dark. Ilara could feel the heat radiating from Chloe's body, a tangible presence that seemed to warm the cool air around them. The scent of her vanilla shampoo was stronger now, a sweet, intoxicating cloud that filled Ilara's senses and made her feel dizzy. She was going to break. Lying here, so close and yet so far, was a pain more acute than any she had ever known. Every instinct screamed at her to close the distance, to reach out and touch, to finally confess the truth that was eating her alive. But fear was a cold, heavy blanket, pinning her in place. Then, in the darkness, Chloe's voice came again, small and tentative. "Elle? Yeah." Ilara's voice was a croak. "Thanks," Chloe whispered. "For this. For everything." A small movement. A rustle of sheets. And then, a gentle pressure against her back. Chloe had shifted, turning onto her side to face Ilara's back, her knees brushing lightly against the backs of Ilara's thighs. It was an innocent, unconscious gesture of seeking comfort, but to Ilara, it was a lightning strike. The contact, separated by two thin layers of cotton, seared through her, a brand of pure, agonizing bliss. Her entire body went rigid. She squeezed her eyes shut, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She tried to focus on her breathing, to regulate the hurricane that was raging inside her. In, out. In, out. But it was no use. The point of contact was a sun, a gravitational center around which her entire consciousness was now orbiting. She could feel the gentle puff of Chloe's breath against her shoulder blade. She could feel the ambient warmth of her body creating a cocoon of heat in the space between them. This was intimacy on a scale she had never dared to imagine, and it was utterly, terrifyingly platonic. It was everything she wanted and nothing she could have. And as she lay there, suspended in that perfect, impossible moment, Alara knew that something had irrevocably broken. The careful walls she had built around her heart had been breached, and she had no idea how she would ever rebuild them. The catalyst had occurred. The stasis was over, and she was falling with no safety net in sight. Sleep did not come easily. Alara drifted in a shallow, restless state, hyper-aware of every shift and sigh from the woman beside her. Sometime in the deep, silent hours of the morning, Chloe's arm flopped over in her sleep, her hand coming to rest on Alara's waist. The touch was feather-light, innocent, and yet it sent a fresh wave of fire through Alara's system. She lay perfectly still, barely breathing, memorizing the weight and shape of Chloe's hand on her hip. It felt like a brand, a claim, a promise of something she knew was only a dream. When morning finally broke, painting the sky in pale shades of gray and rose, Alara felt as though she had run a marathon. The shift was immediate. The next morning, as they navigated the kitchen in a dance of coffee-making and toast buttering, the air between them was different. It was charged, thick with the memory of the night before. Chloe was quieter than usual, her gaze soft and contemplative. She would look at Alara for a fraction of a second too long, a small, thoughtful frown creasing her brow, before quickly looking away as if she'd been caught staring. The charged conversations began that very weekend. Mark was a temporary non-issue, a tense ceasefire having been declared over text message. The apartment became their sanctuary, a bubble where the outside world and its demands seemed to fade away. They fell into a pattern of late-night talks, curled up on the same couch where it had all begun, but now the space between them was smaller, their knees often brushing. "What does real love feel like, Elle?" Chloe asked one night, swirling the dregs of wine in her glass. The question wasn't directed at anyone in particular, more an utterance into the quiet space of the living room. Not the movie kind, you know? Not the checklist. The real, messy, everyday kind. What's it supposed to feel like? Alara's heart gave a painful lurch. How could she answer that? How could she describe the way her world seemed to center around the sound of Chloe's laughter? How could she explain the feeling of rightness, of coming home, that washed over her whenever Chloe entered a room? How could she put into words the agonizing, beautiful ache of loving someone so much it physically hurt? "I think," Alara began, choosing her words carefully, her voice a low murmur. "I think it feels like being seen. Truly seen. Not just for the good parts, but for the messy parts, the scared parts, the parts you don't show anyone else. And that person, they don't just tolerate those parts. They love you more because of them." She risked a glance at Chloe, whose eyes were fixed on her, wide and intense. "It feels safe," Alara finished, the word a quiet confession. "Like you can finally stop pretending, stop performing, and just be." Chloe was silent for a long time, her gaze distant. The firelight from the television flickered across her face, highlighting the thoughtful curve of her lips. "Safe," she repeated, the word a soft echo. "I've never felt that. Not really. With Mark, it's exciting. It's passionate. But it's not safe. It's like I'm always on stage, and if I miss a line, the whole thing will fall apart." The confession hung between them, another intimate secret added to their growing collection. Alara wanted to tell her it could be safe. With me, it would be safe. But the words remained lodged in her throat, caught behind the ever-present fear. A few nights later, Chloe brought up something else. She was scrolling through her phone, a common sight, but this time she paused, her thumb hovering over the screen. "Hey, this is weird," she said, a note of manufactured casualness in her tone that immediately put Alara on high alert. "I was reading this article. It's about compulsory heterosexuality." Alara's blood ran cold. "Oh," she said, trying to sound nonchalant as she pretended to be engrossed in the book on her lap. Her eyes weren't reading the words. They were just staring at a blur of black ink on a white page. "Yeah, it's this theory that, well, that our culture pushes women so hard towards heterosexuality that some women don't even realize they're not straight. They just assume they are, and they date men and try to make it work, but they always feel like something is missing. She finally looked up from her phone, her expression a mixture of academic curiosity and something deeper, something more personal. Isn't that fascinating? Fascinating isn't the word I'd use, Alara thought, her heart doing a frantic tap dance against her ribs. Terrifying, maybe. Hopeful. Life-altering. I guess it makes sense, Alara said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Society has a lot of expectations. Exactly. Chloe's eyes lit up, and she leaned forward, her passion for the topic overriding her earlier feigned indifference. And the article said that for some women, their deepest, most fulfilling emotional connections are with their female friends. And they mistake that for just really good friendship because they don't have a framework for anything else. They keep searching for that same level of intimacy with men and end up frustrated when they can't find it. She was describing their exact dynamic. She was narrating the last 3 years of Alara's life, and she had no idea. The situational irony was so thick, so potent, it was almost suffocating. Alara felt a hysterical laugh bubbling in her chest and quickly swallowed it down. That's a really interesting theory, Alara managed. I know, right? Chloe leaned back, a thoughtful, faraway look in her eyes. The conversation drifted to other topics, but the subject lingered in the air, an unspoken question mark that pulsed with a life of its own. Alongside these charged conversations, the physical contact escalated. It was a slow, subtle creep, a gradual erosion of the platonic boundaries that had once seemed so solid. It began with small things. A lingering hug at the end of the day that lasted just a beat too long, Chloe's arms tightening around her, her face buried in the crook of Alara's neck. Alara would stand frozen, her own arms wrapped around Chloe's back, her mind short-circuiting at the prolonged contact. Then, their hands started finding each other. While watching a movie, their hands, resting on the cushion between them, would brush. At first, one of them would flinch away. But soon, the contact would remain. A pinky finger hooked around another. Then a whole hand, resting gently on top of the other. The first time Chloe's fingers tentatively intertwined with hers, Alara thought she might actually pass out. She had stared at their joined hands, at the way Chloe's longer fingers fit so perfectly between her own, and a wave of such profound longing and rightness had washed over her that it brought tears to her eyes. She had to turn her head away so Chloe wouldn't see. Chloe seemed to be unconsciously drawn to her, a magnetic pull she didn't seem to understand herself. When they talked, she would reach out and place her hand on Alara's arm, a casual gesture to emphasize a point, but her fingers would remain, softly tracing patterns on Alara's sleeve. Once, as they were cooking dinner together, a stray strand of hair fell across Alara's face. Without thinking, Chloe reached out, her movements gentle and deliberate, and tucked it behind Alara's ear. Her fingertips brushed against Alara's temple, a whisper of a touch that sent a jolt of pure electricity through her. Their eyes met, and for a split second, the air crackled. Chloe's hand froze, hovering near Alara's face, her expression one of dawning surprise, as if her own body had betrayed a secret she hadn't known she was keeping. She snatched her hand back, her cheeks flushing a pretty pink, and quickly turned back to the vegetables she was chopping, suddenly intensely focused on dicing an onion. These moments were becoming more frequent, these little slips of the mask. Alara became a detective of Chloe's unconscious, collecting these moments like precious jewels. She started noticing the way Chloe's gaze would soften when she looked at her, a tenderness creeping into her expression that had never been there before. More than once, Alara caught her staring, completely unguarded. And then there were the glances, the ones that made Alara's stomach bottom out. During a conversation, Chloe's eyes would drop, just for a heartbeat, to Alara's mouth. It was a fleeting, almost imperceptible movement, but Alara saw it every single time. And every single time, it felt like a dare. The hope inside her was no longer a spark. It was a bonfire. It was a terrifying, brilliant, all-consuming inferno that threatened to burn her from the inside out. She lived in a constant state of heightened awareness, her senses dialed up to their highest setting. She was acutely aware of the scent of Chloe's perfume as she walked past, the sound of her breathing in the next room, the warmth of her presence on the couch. This escalation was a sweet torture. Each day brought a new level of intimacy, a new piece of evidence to support the impossible theory that Chloe's feelings were changing. But with the rising hope came a rising terror. She was so close to everything she had ever wanted, but the fall would be catastrophic if she was wrong. She was walking a tightrope stretched between heaven and hell, and she didn't dare look down. The tension was building, winding tighter and tighter with every lingering touch and every loaded conversation. Alara knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that something had to give. The quiet of their apartment was no longer peaceful. It was the silence of a held breath, the calm before a storm that was about to break. The storm Alara had been anticipating arrived not with a thunderclap, but with a creeping, unbearable silence. The bonfire of hope had become too hot, too bright. The constant proximity to the sun was starting to burn her. The exquisite torture of their escalating intimacy was becoming more torture than exquisite. Alara found herself doing the one thing she never thought she would. She began to pull away. It was a subtle retreat, a series of small, self-preservationist flinches. She started going to bed earlier, inventing headaches or early morning meetings to escape the late-night talks on the couch. When Chloe's hand would reach for hers during a movie, Alara would pretend to need to scratch her nose or grab a sip of water, gently pulling her hand away. She kept their conversations light, steering them away from the deep, treacherous waters of love and life and what was missing. She was building her walls back up, brick by painful brick, because the hope was becoming more dangerous than the ache had ever been. At least the ache was a stable pain. This hope was a volatile, unpredictable element that threatened to destroy her completely. She thought she was being subtle, but she had underestimated how attuned Chloe had become to her. After 3 days of this careful, strategic avoidance, Chloe cornered her. Alara was in the kitchen, rinsing her coffee mug, her back to the room, planning her escape to her bedroom for a day of feigned work. Alara. Chloe's voice was quiet, but it held a new firmness that made Alara freeze, her hand still under the running water. She had used her full name. She rarely did that unless it was serious. Alara slowly turned off the tap, the sudden silence of the kitchen amplifying the sound of her own frantic heartbeat. She took a deep breath and turned around, leaning back against the counter to feign a casualness she was nowhere near feeling. "Hey, what's up?" Chloe was standing in the doorway, arms crossed over her chest. Her expression wasn't angry, it was hurt and determined. The combination was terrifying. "That's what I want to ask you," she said, her voice level. "You've been avoiding me. You've been hiding from me for days, and I want to know why." It was a direct hit. No preamble, no softening the blow. Just the raw, unvarnished truth. The confrontation Alara had been dreading was here. "I haven't been avoiding you," Alara lied, the words feeling flimsy and transparent even as she said them. "I've just been busy. Work has been crazy." Chloe took a step into the kitchen, her eyes never leaving Alara's. "Don't lie to me, Elle. Please." The plea in her voice disarmed Alara more than any accusation could have. "Ever since that night, the night I stayed in your room, something shifted. We got closer. It was nice. It was the nicest thing I've felt in a long time. And now you're pulling away. It's like you've built a wall between us overnight. Did I do something? Did I make you uncomfortable?" The genuine concern in Chloe's voice was a knife to Alara's heart. She was causing Chloe pain to protect herself from a potential, greater pain. It was the most selfish thing she had ever done. "No," Alara whispered, shaking her head. "No, Chloe, you didn't do anything." "Then what is it?" Chloe pressed, taking another step closer. They were only a few feet apart now. Alara could see the faint flecks of green in her whiskey-colored eyes. "What aren't you telling me?" "I feel like I'm going crazy. I feel like we're on the edge of something important, and you're trying to back away from the cliff. Just talk to me." Alara's defenses crumbled. The carefully constructed walls came tumbling down, leaving her exposed and trembling. She couldn't do it. She couldn't lie to that open, searching face. But she couldn't tell the truth either. The truth was a nuclear bomb. Her silence was an answer in itself. Chloe's expression softened, the hurt giving way to a dawning, hesitant understanding. She seemed to be connecting dots, re-examining the past few weeks through a new lens. "I broke up with Mark," Chloe said suddenly, the words dropping into the tense silence. Alara's head snapped up. "What?" "Yesterday," Chloe confirmed, her voice soft. "I ended it. For good this time." "Why?" Alara breathed, though she was terrified of the answer. Chloe's gaze was intense, unwavering. She took the final step, closing the space between them until she was standing directly in front of Alara. She reached out, not to touch, but just to hover her hand in the air near Alara's arm, an offering of connection. "Because of you," Chloe whispered, and the world stopped turning. Alara felt the floor disappear from beneath her feet. She gripped the edge of the counter behind her to keep from physically collapsing. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice a strangled whisper. "I ended it because being with him felt like a lie," Chloe explained, her own voice trembling with the weight of her confession. "And being with you, it feels like the only true thing in my life. That conversation we had about feeling safe? I feel that with you, Alara. I feel seen. And all those articles I was reading, that wasn't just academic curiosity. I think I might not be as straight as I thought. The pre-confession. The point of no return. It was happening." Alara was living in the moment she had only ever dared to dream about in the deepest, most secret parts of her heart. It didn't feel real. She felt like she was floating outside her own body, watching this scene unfold. "I realized," Chloe continued, her voice dropping even lower, becoming more intimate, "that I was so unhappy because I was trying to force something that just isn't me. I was trying to want what I was supposed to want. But it's not what I actually want." "What do you want?" Alara asked, the question feeling impossibly heavy, the answer holding the power to either save her or shatter her into a million pieces. Chloe's eyes, which had been filled with a storm of confusion and discovery, suddenly cleared. They became focused, certain. Her gaze dropped, deliberately this time, no fleeting accident, from Alara's eyes to her mouth. The look was so potent, so full of intention, that Alara felt her lips tingle as if they had already been touched. "I've been thinking about what it would be like to kiss you," Chloe confessed, her voice a raw, vulnerable whisper that was meant for Alara and Alara alone. "A lot." The air crackled. The space between them was no longer a chasm, it was a live wire, humming with a voltage that was about to arc. This was it. The cliff edge Chloe had spoken of. There was no backing away now. They were standing on the precipice together, and the only way forward was to jump. Alara's fear was a roaring beast in her chest, but for the first time, the hope was stronger. It was a brilliant, blinding light, and it was pulling her forward. The three words echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of the kitchen. A lot. Chloe had been thinking about kissing her. A lot. The confession, so simple and so monumental, hung in the air between them, a tangible thing. It was the key Alara had been waiting for, the one that would unlock the cage she had built around her own heart. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now overshadowed by a tidal wave of validation and a dizzying, terrifying hope. A lot. Alara repeated, her voice barely audible. The words felt foreign on her tongue. She had spent so long guarding the secret, so long convinced it was a solitary burden. To hear even a fraction of it mirrored back at her was disorienting, like seeing her reflection speak. Chloe nodded, a small, jerky movement. Her eyes were wide, searching Alara's face for a reaction, for any sign that she hadn't just made the biggest mistake of her life. Is that crazy? And that was it. The final push. The sight of Chloe, beautiful, brave, terrified Chloe, laying her own heart on the line was all it took for Alara's own dam of restraint to finally, catastrophically break. The years of silence, of quiet pining, of being the supportive friend while her own soul was eroding, it all came rushing out. A shaky, half-hysterical laugh escaped Alara's lips. "Crazy? Chloe, I've been thinking about kissing you for 3 years, 2 months, and about 16 days. The specificity of it, the sheer, unvarnished weight of the timeline, landed on Chloe with visible force. Her eyes widened even further, the confusion and hope warring in her expression giving way to pure, unadulterated shock. Her lips parted slightly. "What?" 3 years, Alara repeated, the words tasting of freedom and terror. Now that she had started, she couldn't stop. "Every time you cried over some guy who didn't deserve you, every time I gave you advice I didn't want you to take, every single night we've sat on that couch, and I've wanted to scream. I've been in love with you. All this time." The final, most dangerous words were out. "I'm in love with you." They filled the small kitchen, potent and irreversible. Alara's heart was hammering so hard she felt it in her throat, a wild drumbeat against the base of her skull. She had done it. She had detonated the bomb. She braced herself for the fallout, for the look of pity, of horror, of friendship turning to ash. But that's not what happened. Chloe's shock slowly melted away, replaced by a look of such profound, dawning understanding that it stole Alara's breath. It was as if the last few years of her life were replaying in her mind, but this time with the key to deciphering them all. The late-night talks, the feeling of something missing, the inexplicable pull towards Alara, it all clicked into place. "Oh," Chloe breathed, the word a soft, wondering exhalation. She raised a hand, her fingers trembling slightly, and gently cupped Alara's cheek. Her skin was warm, and the contact sent a shower of sparks down Alara's spine. "Oh, Alara. All this time." Alara could only nod, tears welling in her eyes. They were tears of fear, of relief, of 3 years of pent-up emotion finally being released. Chloe's thumb stroked softly across her cheekbone, wiping away a tear that had escaped. "All those times I felt like I was going crazy," Chloe whispered, more to herself than to Alara. "All those times I felt like no one could ever measure up. It was you. I was measuring them against you, and I didn't even know it." The words were an absolution. They were the answer to a prayer Alara had been too afraid to speak. Chloe understood. She wasn't horrified. She wasn't pulling away. She was leaning closer. The world seemed to slow down, the focus narrowing to the few inches of space between their faces. Chloe's gaze was soft, full of a wondrous, new emotion. It was a look of discovery, of coming home. Her eyes flickered once more from Alara's eyes to her lips, and this time, it wasn't a question. It was a promise. "Alara," Chloe whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Can I kiss you?" It was the most beautiful question Alara had ever heard. It was permission, it was desire, it was the beginning of everything. Alara couldn't find her voice. She just nodded, a single, desperate affirmation. And then, Chloe closed the remaining distance. The first touch was impossibly soft, a tentative, questioning brush of her lips against Alara's. It was a whisper of a kiss, a test of the waters. It was gentle and hesitant, and it was the most electrifying thing Alara had ever felt. A shudder went through her entire body, a release of all the tension she had been holding for years. She made a small sound in the back of her throat, a sigh of surrender, and leaned into the kiss, her hands coming up to grip Chloe's waist, pulling her closer, needing to feel that this was real. That was all the encouragement Chloe needed. The hesitation melted away, replaced by a certainty that mirrored Alara's own. The kiss deepened. It was no longer a question, but an answer. 1,000 answers. It was the answer to every lonely night, every silent tear, every unspoken "I love you." Chloe's lips were soft and warm, and they tasted of coffee and the sweet, impossible flavor of reciprocation. One of Chloe's hands slid from Alara's cheek into her hair, her fingers tangling in the strands at the nape of her neck, holding her there. Alara's own hands tightened at Chloe's waist, her fingers digging into the soft fabric of her shirt. The world tilted on its axis and then fell away completely. There was no kitchen, no apartment, no city outside the window. There was only Chloe. The feel of her, the taste of her, the sound of her soft sigh mingling with Alara's own. It was a kiss of discovery, of longing finally met. It was clumsy and desperate and perfect. It was years of friendship and subtext and unspoken feelings finally being given a voice, a language that went beyond words. It was a hurricane and a safe harbor all at once. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless, gasping for air as if they had been underwater for a very long time. They didn't move away. They rested their foreheads together, their chests rising and falling in unison. Alara's eyes were closed, but she could feel Chloe's breath on her lips, could feel the warmth of her hands still tangled in her hair. Wow, Chloe breathed out, the word a puff of air against Alara's skin. Yeah, Alara whispered back, her voice hoarse. Wow. She slowly opened her eyes. Chloe's were already open, inches from her own. They were shining, filled with tears and wonder and a deep, soul-shaking relief. That felt, Chloe started, then trailed off, unable to find the words. Like coming home, Alara finished for her, the words a simple, profound truth. A slow, brilliant smile spread across Chloe's face, a smile so full of joy and rightness that it made Alara's heart feel like it might actually burst. Yeah, Chloe whispered, her smile widening. Exactly like that, and then she leaned in and kissed her again, a soft, sealing kiss that promised a new beginning. The aftermath of the kiss was a strange and delicate space. They stood in the kitchen for a long time, foreheads still pressed together, hands still clinging to each other, as if letting go would make the moment dissolve. The air was thick with the phantom electricity of what had just happened, a beautiful, shimmering haze. The world outside the bubble of their linked foreheads felt distant and muted. It was Chloe who spoke first, her voice a hushed murmur against Alara's skin. I'm terrified. The admission, so raw and honest, lanced through the haze of bliss and grounded Alara back in her body. The fear she had momentarily forgotten came rushing back, not as a roaring beast, but as a cold, quiet tremor. This was real. This had consequences. This changed everything. Me too, Alara confessed, her own voice barely a whisper. She pulled back just enough to look into Chloe's eyes. I'm absolutely, utterly terrified. Chloe's expression was a mirror of her own feelings, a potent cocktail of joy, relief, and sheer, heart-pounding panic. What does this mean? What do we do now? The questions were huge, looming over them. The comfortable, easy structure of their friendship had been demolished, and they were standing in the rubble, unsure of how to start rebuilding. There was Mark, a freshly dismantled relationship. There were their families, their friends, a world that had always seen them as a specific, platonic unit. And there was the new, fragile, beautiful thing between them, a seedling that needed to be protected from the storm of reality. I don't know, Alara said honestly, her thumb tracing the line of Chloe's jaw. The simple act of being able to touch her like this, freely and with intention, was still a shock to her system. I guess, we figure it out. Together. Together, Chloe repeated, testing the word. A small, hopeful smile touched her lips. I like the sound of that, she paused, her gaze turning inward, thoughtful. It's funny, she began, her voice soft and wondering. All those times I complained to you about Mark, about feeling like he didn't really get me. I would describe what I wanted, what I felt was missing. Alara nodded, her heart aching in a new, retroactive way for all those painful conversations. I remember. I was describing you, Chloe said, her eyes locking with Alara's, the realization hitting her with the force of a revelation. Every single time. I was describing the way you listen. The way you look at me like what I'm saying actually matters. The way you know what I need before I do. I was measuring every relationship against what I had with you, and they all came up short. I didn't have the right word for it. I thought it was just friendship. The best friendship. I didn't know it could be this. The confession was a balm on the old wounds of Alara's heart. It recontextualized years of pain, turning them from evidence of her solitary suffering into a map of their shared, unconscious journey towards each other. She hadn't been a ghost after all. She had been the benchmark. The gold standard. I always felt like you were the one person who spoke my language, Alara admitted, her voice thick with emotion. I just thought I was the only one who felt the pull. The pull, Chloe echoed with a soft laugh. God, that's exactly what it is. It's like I've been fighting against a current for years, trying to swim in a different direction, and I was so exhausted. And when I'm with you, it's like I finally just let go. and the current is taking me exactly where I was supposed to go all along. The geographical metaphor was so perfect, so fitting for the world-tilting shift they had just experienced. They had been fighting a tide that was always meant to bring them together. The fear was still there, a quiet hum beneath the surface, but it was being steadily replaced by a profound sense of rightness. This was not a mistake. This was a course correction. So, Alara said, her tone a little more steady, a little more brave. What's our first step? In figuring it out. Chloe considered this, her expression serious. First, she said, her voice firm, no more hiding. From each other. If you're scared, you tell me. If I'm confused, I tell you. We talk. About everything. Okay, Alara agreed immediately. I can do that. Second, Chloe continued, a playful glint appearing in her eyes. I think you should probably kiss me again. Just to, confirm the data. A real, genuine laugh bubbled up out of Alara, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. It felt incredible. She leaned in, and this time, the kiss wasn't one of desperate confession or shocked discovery. It was a kiss of decision. It was slow and sure and full of promise. It was the first sentence of a new chapter. When they pulled apart, the path forward still wasn't clear, but it no longer felt terrifying. It felt like an adventure they were about to embark on together. Let's just take it one day at a time, Chloe suggested, her hand finding Alara's and lacing their fingers together. The fit was perfect. Natural. One day at a time, Alara agreed, squeezing her hand. The future was a blank page, but for the first time in a very long time, she wasn't afraid to write on it. She was standing with the co-author of her story, and she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that they were about to write something beautiful. The aftermath was not an ending, but a beginning, and the fear was just the shadow cast by a brilliant, rising sun. 3 months later. The morning light was a soft, golden thing, spilling through the blinds and painting stripes across the rumpled duvet. Alara woke slowly, drawn from the depths of a peaceful sleep not by an alarm clock, but by a sense of contentment so profound it was a physical presence in the room. She blinked, her eyes adjusting to the light, and the first thing she saw was Chloe, still fast asleep beside her. This was their new normal. Waking up in the same bed, not out of distress or a desperate need for comfort, but because it was their bed now. Alara's room had quietly, unofficially become their room. Chloe's favorite mug now sat next to hers on the nightstand. A stack of her books was piled on the floor. Her vanilla-scented shampoo had taken up permanent residence in the shower. Their lives had merged, not with a crash, but with the gentle, inexorable pull of 2 rivers flowing into one. Chloe was lying on her stomach, her face turned towards Alara, one arm flung out over the pillows. Her hair was a messy halo, and her lips were slightly parted, a soft puff of air escaping with each breath. She looked so peaceful, so unguarded. Alara's heart did a familiar little flip, a feeling she had come to cherish. The old, jagged ache had been replaced by a warm, steady glow, a pilot light of love that warmed her from the inside out. She reached out, her movements slow so as not to wake her, and gently brushed a stray strand of hair off Chloe's cheek. 3 months ago, a touch like this would have been an impossible dream. Now, it was as natural as breathing. The first few weeks had been a navigation of uncharted territory. There had been long talks, some filled with tears, as they unpacked years of unspoken feelings. There had been moments of fear, a flicker of the old panic when the reality of their new relationship felt overwhelming. Chloe had to have a difficult, final conversation with Mark, a closing of a chapter that was necessary, but not without its own sadness. They had to figure out how to tell their friends, their families. They had decided to take it slow, to let their new reality settle in before announcing it to the world. They had given themselves this time, this bubble, to simply be together. And in that bubble, they had fallen into the most natural rhythm. It turned out that the foundation of their deep friendship was the perfect bedrock for a relationship. The easy companionship, the inside jokes, the innate understanding of each other's moods, it was all still there, but now it was layered with a new, thrilling intimacy. It was discovering that your favorite book had a secret, beautiful chapter you never knew existed. Chloe stirred, her nose wrinkling in her sleep before her eyes fluttered open. They were hazy with sleep for a moment, and then they focused on Alara, and a slow, beautiful smile spread across her face. It was a smile that Alara was starting to think she could live on for the rest of her life. "Hi," Chloe murmured, her voice a sleepy rasp. "Hi yourself," Alara whispered back. Chloe stretched, a contented, cat-like movement, and then rolled onto her side, snuggling closer until her forehead was resting against Alara's. "What were you thinking about?" "Just this," Alara said, gesturing vaguely at the room at them. "How different everything is. How right it feels." Chloe's smile softened. "I was just dreaming about that first night. The night I was so upset about Mark and I asked to sleep in here." Alara's heart squeezed. "The night of the catalyst." "The night of the catalyst," Chloe agreed. "I was so lost. I felt like I was drowning, and I just knew, instinctively, that you were the only lifeboat I wanted. I didn't understand why then. I just knew I had to be near you." She opened her eyes, her gaze clear and direct. "Thank you for letting me in that night." "I'd let you in every night for the rest of my life," Alara said, the words simple and true. Chloe's eyes welled up, a common occurrence these days. They were both still so full of the emotion of it all, it often spilled over at the smallest provocation. "You know," she said, her voice thick, "for the longest time, I thought love was supposed to be a lightning strike. Something loud and dramatic that knocks you off your feet. I kept looking for a hurricane." "And?" Alara prompted softly. "And I realized I was wrong," Chloe whispered, her hand coming up to cup Alara's face, just as it had in the kitchen that first day. "Love isn't a hurricane. It's the quiet, steady warmth of the sun. It was there all along, and I was just too busy chasing storms to notice I was already bathed in light." She leaned in and kissed her, a slow, sweet morning kiss that tasted of sleep and home. Later, they were in the kitchen, moving around each other in the easy, practiced dance of people who know each other's rhythms. Alara was pouring coffee while Chloe buttered toast. The sun was fully up now, streaming into the room, making dust motes dance in the air. It was a perfectly ordinary, perfectly extraordinary moment. "So, I was thinking," Chloe said, taking a bite of toast. "My parents are having that barbecue next weekend. Maybe it's time we told them." Alara looked up from the coffee mugs, her heart giving a little flutter of nerves. This was the next step. Stepping out of their bubble and into the world together. The fear was still there, a tiny, distant echo, but it was nothing compared to the solid certainty of the woman standing in front of her. She looked at Chloe, really looked at her. Her hair was still a mess, she had a smudge of butter on her cheek, and she was wearing one of Alara's old, faded t-shirts. And she was the most beautiful thing Alara had ever seen. The years of quiet, hopeless pining, the nights spent listening to heartbreaks, the terror and the confusion, it had all been a long, winding, and often painful path. But it had led her here. To this kitchen, to this moment, to this love. A slow smile spread across Alara's face. "Yeah," she said, her voice full of a confidence she hadn't possessed 3 months ago. "I think you're right. It's time." Chloe's answering grin was brilliant. She crossed the kitchen in 2 steps and wrapped her arms around Alara's waist, burying her face in her neck. "Scared?" she mumbled into Alara's skin. Alara wrapped her own arms around Chloe, holding her tight, breathing in the familiar, comforting scent of her. She thought about the journey, about the fear of taking a dare, of jumping off a cliff into the unknown. And she realized that sometimes, the most frightening dares led to the most beautiful discoveries. "A little," Alara admitted honestly, resting her chin on top of Chloe's head. "But as long as I'm with you?" She pulled back, meeting Chloe's warm, whiskey-colored eyes. "Then we're both exactly where we need to be."